Welcome to the Balkans Debrief End of Year episode. It has been a tumultuous year, largely defined by Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The developments in the Western Balkans were all shaped against this grim backdrop. But though the year in the region ends in an uncertain place, with the tensions between Serbia and Kosovo at an all-time high, there has been some positive developments too. Joining me to discuss all this are my two colleagues, Maja Piscevic, Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council's Europe Center based in Belgrade. Hello, Maja. Thank you for joining us.
Hello, Ilva. Great to see you.
And we'll talk to Damir Marusic, Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council's Europe Center from Washington, D.C. Welcome, Damir.
Hi. Thank you very much. Great to be here.
Yeah, let's have this, I prefer to call it a fun episode for whatever fun we can have in the region. But I wanted to start with Maja. What has been the high point of this year for you, and what has been the low point?
So many low points, especially one that we will talk about. But on the high points, I would probably say that it's starting the accession talks with Albania and North Macedonia. Long overdue, but eventually happened, unfortunately shadowed by Bulgaria's blackmail in a way. And that will still work its way through this process, but at least the EU was firm that this is the way forward. On the regional front, I would say also open Balkans. But more in terms of the enthusiasm and building relationship than in results so far. So that's, I think, what needs to happen in the next step. That enthusiasm has to translate to results, to progress, and to concrete, tangible benefits for businesses and the people. Yeah, the third one is definitely Berlin process, EU Western Balkans session in Tirana, which was positive, with good atmosphere, good development. Again, this needs to translate into tangible progress, and then the Berlin process launched in November in Berlin, or relaunched or re-energized with 3 important agreements signed by all 6 members. Now they need to be ratified, and the implementation will be a real test of their success. So nothing really firm to hold on and to say this has been a real victory. Everything is still in the process and relatively fluid.
Damir, what will be your high and low points?
Oh, I think it's my low.
Yeah, go ahead. Tell the low. I think we all agree on what the low point is, but go ahead, Maja.
How many of them?
Low point is Putin, and I really don't call it Russia's invasion. I call it Putin's invasion in Ukraine. And you know, the fact that we live in a different world now. And I think everything that happened, including here in the region, relations with Kosovo, between Serbia and Kosovo, it's all in a way a reflection of that. Of course, that's not the only reason of the crisis, but everything has changed. You know, the economic crisis, energy situation, everything. It has been so efficient in changing the way we think about geopolitics, about the world, that we are still grappling to understand how this will move forward. So that's the most important thing. In the region, Kosovo-Serbia relationship, as we just heard a couple of minutes ago from our colleagues from Kosovo, this is really, I know we'll talk more about it, but this is so worrying and so embarrassing in a way, and so irresponsible to the people living there, that it's really hard to understand how we came to this situation, and even harder to think how we'll get out of it.
Damir?
Yeah. Well, look, I think you're not going to get a hugely different read from me. I'd say that the high point for me, and maybe it's kind of a paradox to put it this way, is that I think that one of the good things that's happened this year is that the scales have come off from people's eyes as to the real prospects of European enlargement. Now, let me qualify that. I mean, I agree with Maja that it's a very good thing that North Macedonia and Albania are now more firmly on their path forward. But, for the longest time, everyone dealing with the region has always intoned about the inevitability of the countries joining the EU. And the whole discussion for the longest time has been just about the necessity of reforms. Once the reforms are done, countries will be admitted into the European family and problems will be resolved. The reality, which has been apparent for quite a long time now, and it's been a bitter joke in the region. The Europeans pretend to want the countries in the Union, and the countries themselves pretend to do the reforms in order to get in. It's been a common joke, but really, I think in the last year, that joke has been accepted, I think, as the actual dynamic. So I guess what I'm getting at in the paradox is that the conversation has shifted away from this kind of unreality about a very technocratic process into something much more political. And yes, I think that's right. I think we have the war in Ukraine as the main catalyst for this kind of change in talking. The reality is the Europeans have given a sign to the Ukrainians that they will become members at some point. But again, I think everyone knows that the likelihood of Ukraine joining the EU within our lifetimes, quite frankly, is just not very realistic. So the question then on everyone's mind becomes, well, so what do we do about it? In the Western Balkans, I think the situation is much less call it long term than Ukraine. I think there's a real shot for countries in the Western Balkans in our lifetimes to join the EU. But we're no longer talking about this being in the next 2, 3, 5 years, by 2030 or something like that. I think the reality has set in that that's not going to be the case. So again, the question now on everyone's mind is, what do we do until then, until full membership? And I think that's actually been very, very helpful and very healthy, and a very good development. The Europeans themselves are clearly energized. They're energized to show that that progress is possible, that you can have that a European future is credible, and it's now about defining what that European future looks like. What does the EU look like? Can the EU enlarge? What kind of reforms have to happen? And in the meantime, what can Europe and the region do together? What can Europe do to help the region come along and be a successful partner and start integrating even without full membership? I think that's a very good thing. And again, as Maja mentioned, the Berlin process relaunch and the very successful summit in Tirana a few weeks ago, EU Western Balkans, has been very good. The worst thing, of course, is the Kosovo-Serbia portfolio heading into uncharted territory. It really does feel like the dialogue is dead for the time being anyway. And even though the European proposal for peace seems to have been grudgingly accepted by both sides, it's really not clear in what direction all of this is going to go. And, it's not just not clear to us experts. I'm pretty sure even the actors themselves have no idea how this is going to play out.
If you're done with the list, I'll continue to talk about Serbia and Kosovo. Or you have more?
Yeah, no. I was just going to say, it's that the problem is that we're back to the way the Balkans used to be thought about, as a problem to be solved rather than an opportunity. And again, I think that's a big tragedy.
Maja, Kosovo and Serbia, as Damir rightly says, seems to be locked in a dangerous standoff. Is there a way out? And what does it look like from Belgrade?
Ilva, my father was born in Peć. His father was a teacher. And I went to Peć when I was a child and visited Pečka Patriaršija, Gračanica, Dečani, and so on. And I felt how much in love I felt with that region, although I didn't feel real connection to it. Now thinking about that part of the Balkans, and especially about the north, I really feel like we're talking about no man's land. And that horrifies me. We just heard Jovana Radosavljević, who lives in the north, who said that described this situation as something that they have never witnessed, or at least not in the past decade, and said, we wish that someone would ask us how we feel instead of telling us how we feel. Their voice has not been heard. And I don't know how to think about this other than developing tragedy at this point. Now, how this should move forward, I'm really happy that the U.S. administration is stepping in more, I wanted to say aggressively, hopefully not aggressively, but with more determination to find the solution for this, to help find the solution. I'm glad that EU is on it as much as they can by default. But still, if the leaders from the region don't change their approach and don't start thinking about Kosovo from the standpoint of the people, instead of from the standpoint of them staying in power, then I don't think how this situation will ever change.
Damir, is Washington doing enough on Kosovo and Serbia?
I mean, I agree with Maja that it's heartening to see that both the Europeans and Washington is engaged. But like I said earlier, it's so hard to see how this is going to go. And as you, my dear colleagues, know, I'm often very pessimistic about things. So on my mind is the question of physical security, and that really ends up being the traditional role that Washington has played. Now, the situation is so unpredictable, and the question is to what extent and how will the West, and really Washington will have to take the lead on this? How will KFOR, what role will it play if things really get out of hand in the North, as they really, at this point, at the time of recording, they feel they might be going? I think we shouldn't flinch about that and just talk about politics and reconciliation and figuring things out, because things may already be headed to a place where actors on the ground could just spark something. I mean, we've seen it already. I mean, we're on the cusp of something really going off the rails. So I think that's what policymakers in Washington really need to be thinking hard about, is if you really get into open conflict and bloodshed, what's the plan? How can order be restored, and what is the interim sort of position that the situation can be diffused so that there's space made for some kind of political and again, I think the pressure is going to have to be pretty high on people for a political kind of solution to these things.
Well, I know this is a critical situation between Pristina and Belgrade, and obviously there are even local voices from these countries asking for a new format of the dialogue, for new engagement, for more U.S. Administration engagement. So we'll see what will happen. Although in our last conversation we had with Escobar in Balkans Forward initiative, he did say that they are following closely, but they will not get more role into this crisis right now. Although Maja, Escobar was in the region, did he make the U.S. government point clearly this time? I felt.
I agree, Ilva. I think he did, at least clearer than ever before in terms of commitment. Especially on the association, the necessity of establishing an association in the North. That was really never communicated as clearly and now. And, I do hope that moving forward, that focus will remain. Unfortunately, if for no other reason than because of the crisis. I just remembered our late Prime Minister Zoran Đinđić always used to say, if you want the West to pay attention to you, you need to create a crisis, a good crisis. Well, now we have a crisis that Đinđić could not even dream of, with everything that's happened in this year. So really, it's really sounds cynical a little bit to talk about crisis as opportunity, but maybe this really is an opportunity. Because now is the time to really say, okay, what we've done so far works not well for anyone. Let's see how we want to move forward.
And one only can hope that the leaders of the region can see this as an opportunity and make more bold decisions, which so far they have been reluctant to. But there are also good news, as you mentioned in your high points. The decision, the summit in Tirana, the EU Western Balkans, the EU co-decision to grant candidate status to Bosnia. We had 3 agreements signed by the 6 countries with the Berlin process that was trumpeted as a success story. What are the chances that these agreements will be implemented? And will the common regional market be realized, Damir?
Again, it's a tough question. Again, with the
Fernando,
backdrop of what
be
we've just been.
optimistic a little bit.
No, sure. I mean, look, I mean, despite my pessimism, I do think that it's not impossible to see a better future on this. Look, I think that the way to sort of contextualize this is that as I was saying, I feel like that the Kosovo Serbia thing is a really unfortunate throwback to the way the Balkans have been perceived, and the role they're playing in sort of the consciousness of the West. It's just yet another problem, yet another sort of thing that needs to be solved. But in fact, I do think that very meaningful steps have been taken in the last year. The launch of the Berlin process, the Open Balkan initiative has played, I think, a catalyzing role in getting the Europeans to engage on the common regional market even more seriously, to redouble their efforts to in fact, quite frankly, show that these things are not out of reach, and that the Europeans need to be pushing for these initiatives at 6, whereas Open Balkan has been working at 3 at this point. So, look, so much of it, the devil's in the details. And we also had a couple of weeks after Mr. Escobar, we had Germany's special envoy, Emmanuel Sarrazin, talking with us. And he also was, I think, very realistic about making this an incremental process, that there's a lot of work that needs to be done, but that the goal is realizing a common regional market, that the goal is to integrate these countries in a meaningful way that shows real benefits for the citizens on the ground. So the work will need to be done. It's made no easier by the fact that there is a crisis going on right now between Serbia and Kosovo. But I think that there's a path forward if all actors do seize the opportunity, as you said.
In a paper you both wrote, Damir and Maja, you propose finding ways to integrate the Berlin process and the Open Balkan initiative. What will it take for this to happen, and how it will look, Maja?
Yeah, well, rather than talking about integrating the Open Balkan and Berlin process, because that always collides in a way, and everyone has a view on why this should not happen or what. But I would instead try to phrase it as how to bring political will, local political will, into the process, into the Berlin process. How to bring it together, because unless it comes from the ground, and the ground is here in the Balkans, and then builds up, I don't see how any even most positive reforms and projects can be imposed on the country without the open hands, to get it and to use it in the best possible way. And that's where I actually see the best piece of news, perhaps from this crisis. And that's the change of this EU paradigm toward enlargement. So instead of so far being everything or nothing, so to say, you have to implement all reforms, you have to do all things, and then you will get everything. And then you will have, 40% of your GDP. And often the countries don't know how to absorb that amount of funds, which suddenly comes in, to change it to something that someone called wisely more for more progress awarded with more tangible benefits earlier on in the process. And I think I like to see at least Berlin process as part of that new philosophy. new approach to enlargement, and hope that we are right thinking about it that way.
There has been a new concept, a new phrase introduced this year, gradual integration also. Should the Western Balkan countries respond towards gradual integration, or they should be stuck to the idea we want the final EU membership, the full one, rather than getting whatever is possible in the way, Damir?
No, I mean, look, I'm not sure it's a really meaningful choice. The reality is that the Europeans can't and won't accept new members anytime soon until there's actual, potentially even treaty reform inside the EU, and that's very difficult. Look, I mean, some people say that the EU is due on treaty reform, and something will pass in that unpleasant EU way that things end up passing, which is lots of conflict, compromises, and then half measures, and then you get something. Maybe that's the way to do it. But look, I as I was saying beginning, it's not really. I think the real good news this year is that no one's really thinking in those terms of like, well, I just want it all, and that's the choice. Maybe Mr. Kurti is still thinking that way, but I can't imagine that even he at this point sees anything but a long process. And again, this is not a setback. I really do want to stress that. I think this is a good thing, because being stuck in this endless thing, this is where the region has been for the last, certainly the last decade, and even longer than that. In this belief that deliverance is coming, and it'll be just as soon as X, Y, and Z is done. As Maja said, all for all. That's not productive. It's led to stagnation, and it's not really a choice that anyone has to make. I'll pick one or the other. No, it's a process, and I think everyone's realized that at this point.
So be more pragmatic rather than principled?
No, certainly not. Absolutely not. I mean, both. I mean, because look, and that's the other thing that I think is important to say here. It's that no one is saying that the vision of belonging to Europe is being discarded in any sort of way. We shouldn't be cynical about this. The reality is that Europe is changing itself, and so the Europe that's being born is a Europe that these countries are going to be part of. What that looks like, we're in the process of figuring that out. And there's a role, quite frankly, for the aspirant countries in the Western Balkans, but also Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia to really shape what this new Europe looks like. And that's a good thing. They're actors on their own. They're not just takers. They're not supplicants waiting for things to happen.
And one thing, that will change if this narrative, indeed, not only narrative, but the practice and approach of the EU changes toward the enlargement, will do something that's really important and really missing now. And that's a bottom-up support for reforms, for change, for transition. Because I love how Ivan Krastev says what reforms and transition are for an expert, it's their life for people. And these reforms are often painful. If EU really wants to see those reforms and help us implement it and help us put pressure on the leaders to go through with them, then they should help us feel those benefits and wish for more. And then there will be a motive to move forward.
Last question, because I see we have many interesting things to share, but this is also the last episode, and I want to really close with some positive notes. I did my best with kind of Madeleine Albright's messaging in their clothing, so I'm wearing some Christmassy and bright colors. So I want some more optimism from you. Looking ahead, what are your hopes for 2023 in the region? What stories should we be looking at? And if you had a magic wand, what would that be for the region? Maja?
Oh, now you're inviting me to be pathetic. My daughters always accuse me of being, and yes, I really expect more sense of responsibility, more sense of urgency, more courage, more common practice. And I have to say, it has to come from the leaders in the Balkans, leaders in the EU, leaders in the US. It has to come from above, and really has to throw some, as you say, magic dust on the people living in this region. Because I think that not only Serbs in the north, but the people in the Balkans are largely tired, hopeless, and exhausted. and this has to change. Putin's invasion hasn't helped, but this is the one more reason to try to really come out of it stronger, better, and more united.
Damir?
Well, I'll be even a little bit more specific. I think the real low hanging fruit maybe for the for this upcoming year. There's been a lot of money that's been invested in the green energy transition. It's been pledged in any case. The region has a very outdated and backwards system. It's very reliant on old technologies. And there's a lot of investment that can actually make a huge difference. We're not just talking about dependence and resilience and things like that. Those are important, but there are real chances to modernize. This is a region this is an area where foreign capital can really, I think, make a difference. And it's a mechanism, I think, to even nudge, a very concrete mechanism to by which to nudge exactly what Maja is saying, this kind of sense of common purpose, of coming together to solve problems that are bigger than any one country in the region, that are bigger than, quite frankly, the entire European Union. But it's a goad for all these countries to have something concrete to work on. It's a mechanism by which funds can come and be meaningfully absorbed, again, to Maja's point. This idea that, stabilization funds then come in and countries don't know what to do with them, can't even begin to allocate them, and they're not used properly or smartly. If done right, I think this could be the big story for next year. I'm genuinely hopeful for that. I think that getting at something bigger and more concrete like that, rather than the unfortunately very abstract, and deeply felt, unfortunately, identity issues, questions about history, about the past, transcending that. That's the best way forward. And I'm reasonably optimistic about that.
Well, thank you very much, Maja and Damir. It has been a delight to work with you during this year on Balkans Debrief and working on the Balkans together. I look forward to the next Balkans Debrief episodes in 2023. We have a lot to talk about the region and the expectations and the challenges from this transatlantic point of view. And thank you for joining also our conversation. You can always follow AC Europe on Twitter to be part of our Balkans Debrief conversations. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.